I stared at the text message on my cracked phone screen, my hands trembling so violently I could barely hold the device. Your father is in the hospital. He wants to see you. No apology. No acknowledgement of what they had done. Just a demand, as if the past 3 years hadn't happened. As if they hadn't left my 5-year-old daughter screaming on the side of a California highway while they drove away in their luxury sedan, her tiny hands clutching her backpack, tears streaming down her terrified face. That message was my mother's first contact since the day she called my daughter a burden and physically dragged her out of their car, leaving her on the shoulder of Interstate 5 like discarded trash. The memory still makes my blood run cold. But here's what Eleanor and Richard Miller didn't know when they sent that text. I wasn't the same broken woman they had thrown away. I had rebuilt myself from nothing, and I was about to show them exactly what happens when you abandon the wrong person. But before I tell you what I did next, I need you to do something for me. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, hit that like button. Subscribe because I share real stories about real people finding their power. And comment below, tell me, have you ever had to cut off toxic family members? Your story might help someone else find their courage. Now, let me take you back to where this nightmare really began. 3 years earlier, I was 32 years old and living in what felt like a beautiful prison. My parents' house in San Jose was a sprawling 6,000 square foot monument to success, with marble floors, a chef's kitchen that Eleanor never actually cooked in, and a backyard with a pool that sparkled like a jewel. To anyone looking from the outside, I had it made. A single mother living rent-free in luxury while I got back on my feet. But luxury has a way of hiding rot, and the rot in that house went deep. I had moved back in 7 years prior, 3 months pregnant and newly single. My boyfriend, Marcus, had been my college sweetheart, the one I thought I'd marry. We'd been together for 6 years, living in a small apartment in Oakland, both working entry-level jobs but happy, or so I thought. The day I showed him the positive pregnancy test, his face went white. Not with joy or even shock, but with something that looked like panic mixed with disgust. You said you were on birth control, he said, and there was an accusation in his voice that made my stomach drop. I was, but nothing is 100%. He stood up from our couch, ran his hands through his hair, and said the words that would change everything. I'm not ready for this. I'm not ready to be a father. I think you should take care of it. Take care of it, as if the life growing inside me was a problem to be solved, a mess to be cleaned up. I told him I wanted to keep the baby. He told me that was my choice, but he wouldn't be part of it. 3 days later, I came home from work to find half the apartment empty. His clothes, his computer, his records, all gone. He left a check for $2,000 on the kitchen counter with a note that said, "For expenses, don't contact me again." I tried to make it work alone. I really did. I worked as an administrative assistant at a small law firm, making $38,000 a year, which sounds like money until you're trying to cover rent, utilities, food, and doctor's appointments for a high-risk pregnancy. I was bleeding money every month, falling further behind, and by my 6th month, I had to make a choice. Lose the apartment or ask my parents for help. I should have chosen the apartment. Eleanor and Richard picked me up on a gray Saturday morning in November. I remember Richard's expression when he saw the boxes I had packed, everything I owned fitting into the trunk and back seat of his Mercedes. "This is everything?" he asked, and there was something in his tone that made me feel small. "I travel light," I said, trying to make a joke of it. Eleanor, sitting in the passenger seat with her Chanel sunglasses perched on her head despite the overcast sky, said, "Well, you'll have to be more organized at our house. We can't have clutter everywhere." I was 6 months pregnant, homeless, and alone, and my mother's first concern was clutter. The first few months living with them were bearable. They gave me one of the guest rooms on the 2nd floor, a room decorated in shades of beige and cream that felt more like a hotel than a home. I was nauseous all the time, exhausted from work and pregnancy, and I mostly kept to myself. They treated me with a kind of distant politeness, like I was a houseguest they were obligated to accommodate but didn't particularly enjoy having around. Then Chloe was born. She came 3 weeks early on a freezing January night, her entry into the world accompanied by complications that left me bleeding and terrified. She was tiny, just 5 pounds 4 ounces, with a head full of dark hair and lungs that could wake the dead. I fell in love with her immediately, completely, in a way I didn't know was possible. She was mine, the first thing in my life that was truly, completely mine. Eleanor and Richard came to the hospital, brought flowers, took photos for their Christmas card. Eleanor held Chloe for exactly 4 minutes before handing her back, complaining that the baby was fussing. Richard stood at a distance, looking uncomfortable, as if he wasn't quite sure what to do with an infant. "She's beautiful," Eleanor said, but there was no warmth in it. It was the kind of thing you say because it's expected, not because you mean it. The real problem started when we came home from the hospital. Chloe was a colicky baby, crying for hours at a time, and nothing I did seemed to help. I walked her, rocked her, sang to her, fed her, changed her, and still she cried. I was running on 2 hours of sleep a night, my body still recovering from childbirth, and I felt like I was drowning. Eleanor complained constantly, "That baby needs to learn to self-soothe. You're spoiling her by picking her up every time she cries." She said this while I stood in the kitchen at 2 in the morning, bouncing a screaming infant and crying myself from exhaustion. Richard was worse in his silence. He would come home from work, hear Chloe crying, and immediately retreat to his home office, closing the door firmly behind him. At dinner one night, 3 weeks after we came home, he said, "I think we need to establish some ground rules about noise levels in this house." I was so tired I could barely think straight. "She's a baby. She cries. That's what babies do." "She cries excessively," Eleanor corrected. "Other babies don't cry this much. Maybe you should take her to a doctor." I had taken her to the doctor 3 times. The doctor said she was healthy, just colicky, and that it would pass. But I didn't have the energy to argue. The comments got worse as Chloe got older. When she was learning to walk and knocked over a vase, Eleanor said, "She's going to break everything we own if you don't teach her to be more careful." Never mind that she was 11 months old and learning balance. When Chloe started talking, chattering away in that nonsensical way toddlers do, Richard would say, "Can't you teach her to be quiet? Some of us are trying to work." I paid for Chloe's expenses myself: diapers, formula, clothes, toys, doctor visits, everything. I never asked my parents for money. But they still treated us like we were a financial drain. "Do you know how much our water bill has gone up since you moved in?" Eleanor asked once. "All those baths and laundry for the baby." I started doing Chloe's laundry at the laundromat down the street, hauling baskets of tiny clothes on the bus, just to avoid that particular criticism. When Chloe was 2, I tried to move out. I had been working overtime, saving every penny, and I found a small 1-bedroom apartment in a not great neighborhood that I could almost afford. I told my parents over dinner, trying to make it sound positive, like I was excited about this next chapter. Richard put down his fork and looked at me with something that might have been pity or might have been contempt. "You can't afford that. You're barely making ends meet as it is." "I'll make it work," I said. "With what money?" Eleanor asked. "You have no savings. What happens when Chloe gets sick and you have to miss work? What happens when your car breaks down? You're going to end up evicted within 6 months. And then what? You'll come crawling back here, only this time with an eviction on your record and even worse credit." The terrible thing was, she was probably right. I couldn't afford it. Not really. But I was so desperate to escape, to have my own space, to not feel like I was walking on eggshells every minute of every day. "Stay for another year," Richard said. "Save more money. Be smart about this." So I stayed. And another year turned into 2, then 3, then 5. Chloe grew from a toddler into a little girl, creative and sensitive, and so desperate for her grandparents' approval that it broke my heart. She would bring Eleanor drawings she had made at preschool, carefully colored princesses and flowers, and Eleanor would glance at them and say, "That's nice, dear," before setting them aside without a second look. Chloe would ask Richard to play with her, bringing him her toys, and he would pat her head absently and say, "Grandpa's busy, sweetheart, maybe later." Later never came. I watched my daughter learn, in real time, that her love was unwanted, that her joy was annoying, that her existence was tolerated but not celebrated, and I hated myself for allowing it to happen. By the time Chloe was 5, I had saved almost $15,000. It had taken me years, working overtime whenever possible, cutting every expense I could. I was so close to having enough for first month, last month, deposit, and a small emergency fund. Just a few more months and we could leave. Then Eleanor announced the road trip. It was a Monday evening in July, one of those Bay Area summer days that starts foggy and ends blazing hot. Eleanor came home from her book club meeting, poured herself a glass of wine, and said casually, "Richard and I are thinking of driving down to San Diego for a long weekend. There's a resort we've been wanting to try." I was making dinner, grilled cheese sandwiches for Chloe and myself because that's what we could afford. That sounds nice, I said, meaning it. A weekend without walking on eggshells sounded like heaven. We're thinking of making it a family trip, Eleanor continued, and something in her tone made me look up. It might be good for Chloe to see something outside of her usual routine. I should have said no. I should have trusted my instincts that were screaming at me that something was wrong. But I was so desperate for normalcy, so desperate to believe that maybe this could be the turning point. Maybe my parents would finally bond with Chloe. Maybe we could actually feel like a family. Okay, I heard myself say. When are you thinking? This weekend. That gave me 3 days to prepare. I bought Chloe a new bathing suit, packed snacks and activities to keep her entertained in the car, tried to remember everything I could about managing a 5-year-old's needs on a road trip. I was nervous but hopeful. The morning we left, the temperature was already 85 degrees at 7 a.m. It was going to be a scorcher. Richard had gotten the car washed and detailed the day before, and it gleamed in the driveway like a black diamond. Eleanor wore white linen pants and a silk blouse, looking like she was ready for a yacht club brunch rather than a road trip with a kindergartner. Chloe was vibrating with excitement, wearing her favorite pink dress with the sparkly butterflies on it. She had her backpack, the one covered in unicorn stickers that she had carefully placed one by one, filled with coloring books, crayons, her favorite stuffed bunny, and a juice box. She was practically bouncing. Mama, are we really going to see the ocean? She asked for the 100th time. I knelt down to her level, smoothed her dark hair back from her face. Yes, baby, we're really going, and you're going to love it. Richard started loading the car, and I noticed he put our bags in the trunk last, almost like an afterthought. Eleanor's designer luggage, Richard's leather duffel, and then our 2 small bags, shabby and worn compared to theirs. Chloe and I climbed into the back seat. I made sure Chloe was buckled properly in her booster seat, double-checking the straps. She had her coloring book open before we even left the driveway, humming to herself as she carefully colored a princess's dress purple. The first hour was fine. We drove through San Jose, onto the 101, heading south. The landscape changed from urban sprawl to the golden hills of California, dotted with dark green oaks. Chloe pressed her face to the window, watching everything with wide eyes. Then Eleanor's phone rang. She answered it on speaker, and I heard her sister's voice, sharp and gossipy. So you're really bringing them? Her sister asked, and I felt my stomach drop. We're making the best of it, Eleanor said, her voice tight. I don't know how you do it, Eleanor. Having them in your house all these years. You're a saint. Eleanor laughed, but it was a brittle sound. Well, what choice do we have? Family is family. The way she said family made it sound like a prison sentence. I wanted to say something, to defend us, but I was trapped in the back seat with my daughter, and I didn't want to start a fight. So I stayed silent, hating myself for my cowardice. After the phone call, the energy in the car changed. It was like Eleanor's resentment, usually carefully controlled, was seeping out. She made small comments about the traffic, about the heat, about how long the drive was taking, and each comment had an edge to it. Chloe, oblivious to the tension, started singing. It was a song from her favorite movie, about letting it go, and the cold never bothering her anyway. She had a sweet voice, high and clear, and she sang with the unself-conscious joy that only children possess. She got through maybe 30 seconds before Eleanor exploded. Stop that noise right now. The car went silent. Chloe's mouth snapped shut, her eyes going wide with shock and fear. My heart was pounding. Mom, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. She was just singing. Eleanor turned in her seat, her face flushed with anger. She was screeching. I have a headache and I don't need to listen to that racket for the next 4 hours. She's 5 years old, I said, feeling my own anger rising. She's excited. She's happy. Let her be happy. Let her be happy? Eleanor's voice dripped with sarcasm. The way you let yourself be happy when you got pregnant and ruined your life? The words hung in the air like poison. Chloe's hand found mine, her small fingers squeezing tight. She didn't understand all the words, but she understood that her grandmother was angry and that somehow it was connected to her. Don't, I said, my voice shaking. Don't you dare. Don't I dare what? Eleanor shot back. Tell the truth? You made your bed, Sarah. You made your choices. And now we all have to live with the consequences. Richard had been silent through all of this, his eyes on the road, his jaw tight. Now he spoke, his voice cold and measured. Eleanor's right. We've been patient. We've been generous. But there's a limit to what we can be expected to tolerate. Tolerate? I repeated, incredulous. We're your family, your daughter and your granddaughter. You're a burden, Richard said flatly. Let's not pretend otherwise. You've been living off us for 7 years. 7 years of free rent, free food, free childcare when we watch her so you can work. Do you have any idea how much that's cost us? I felt like I'd been slapped. I've never asked you to watch her. I pay for daycare. I pay for everything she needs. You pay with money you only have because you're not paying rent, Eleanor said. Don't act like you're independent, Sarah. You're dependent on us for everything. Chloe started crying softly beside me, not the loud, wailing cry of a tantrum, but the quiet, heartbroken cry of a child who knows something is very wrong but doesn't understand what. Stop crying, Eleanor said sharply. God, she's so sensitive. You've made her weak, Sarah. You baby her too much. She's 5, I said again, pulling Chloe onto my lap. Seatbelt be damned. I needed to hold her. She's allowed to have feelings. She's allowed to be an inconvenience, you mean, Richard said, just like her mother. The hatred in his voice was shocking in its intensity. This wasn't just frustration or annoyance. This was real, deep-seated resentment that had been building for years. Chloe was shaking now, her face pressed against my shoulder. I was stroking her hair, whispering that it was okay, that Mama had her, trying to comfort her while my own heart was breaking. Maybe we should turn around, I said. Clearly this was a mistake. We're not turning around, Eleanor said. We're almost at the halfway point. We drove in silence for the next 20 minutes. Chloe eventually calmed down enough to sit back in her booster seat, but she kept one hand clutched in mine. She got out her juice box, the one I had packed carefully, and held it with both hands. She was trying so hard to be good, to be quiet, to not cause any more problems. We were on Interstate 5, in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by agricultural land that stretched endlessly in every direction. The sun was blazing down, heat shimmering off the asphalt. Traffic was light but fast, everyone doing 75 or 80. Then it happened. Richard hit a rough patch of road, a pothole that jolted the whole car. Chloe's juice box slipped from her hands. She grabbed for it, but she wasn't fast enough. Apple juice splashed across the leather seat, maybe 2 ounces worth. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Chloe immediately started saying, her voice high with panic. I didn't mean to. I'm sorry. Eleanor's head whipped around. When she saw the juice on the seat, her face contorted with rage. You stupid, careless, clumsy child. It was an accident, I said, already reaching for the napkins I had packed. I'll clean it up. An accident, Eleanor repeated. Everything is always an accident with you two, isn't it? The pregnancy was an accident. Living with us was supposed to be temporary, but turned into 7 years. I'm sure that was an accident too. And now this. It's juice, I said, my voice rising. It's a few drops of apple juice on a leather seat. It will clean up. Stop acting like she committed a crime. This car costs more than you make in a year, Richard said, and suddenly he was pulling over to the shoulder. The car swerved, tires hitting the rumble strips, and for a moment I thought we were going to crash. He slammed on the brakes, and we screeched to a stop, dust billowing up around us. My heart was hammering. Chloe was crying again. Cars were flying past us on the highway, the whole car shaking with their wind. What are you doing? I demanded. Richard, what are you doing? He put the car in park and turned to look at me, and the expression on his face was completely cold. There was no warmth, no love, nothing human in it. I'm done, he said simply. Done with what? Done with this, done with you, done with her, done pretending that having you in our lives is anything but a mistake we've been paying for over and over again. Eleanor was already opening her door, stepping out onto the dusty shoulder. Semi-trucks roared past, their horns blaring. The air smelled like hot asphalt and exhaust. What are you doing? I asked again, but I was starting to understand, and the understanding was making me feel sick. Eleanor opened Chloe's door. The wind from passing cars immediately whipped into the back seat, bringing dust and heat and the roar of engines. Out, Eleanor said. No, I said immediately, wrapping my arms around Chloe. Absolutely not. Close the door. I said out. Eleanor reached in and grabbed Chloe's arm. Chloe screamed, a sound of pure terror that cut through all the traffic noise. Stop it! I was screaming too now, trying to hold on to Chloe, but Eleanor was pulling hard, and Chloe's booster seat made it difficult for me to get a good grip. You're hurting her. Mom, stop, you're hurting her. I fumbled with my own seatbelt, my hands shaking so badly I could barely work the buckle. Richard got out of the car and came around to our side. He grabbed my arm as I was trying to climb out, holding me back. "Let go of me!" I was beyond rational thought now, fighting against his grip, watching Eleanor drag my daughter out of the car. Chloe was screaming for me, her little legs kicking, her backpack falling off her shoulder onto the dirty ground. "Mama! Mama, help me! Please, please, Mama!" I finally got my seatbelt undone and shoved against Richard with all my strength. He wasn't expecting it, and I managed to break free. I jumped out of the car and ran to Chloe. Eleanor had set her down about 20 feet from the car, right on the edge of the shoulder where the ground dropped off into a ditch. Chloe was sobbing so hard she was hyperventilating, her whole body shaking. Her pink dress had dust on it. Her hair was tangled. Her face was red and covered in tears and snot. I scooped her up in my arms, and she wrapped her arms and legs around me so tightly I could barely breathe. "It's okay, baby, it's okay," I was saying over and over, but it wasn't okay. Nothing about this was okay. "Mama, don't let them take me away," Chloe sobbed into my neck. "Please don't leave me here." "Never," I said fiercely. "I will never leave you, never." I turned to face my parents. They were standing by the car, Eleanor with her arms crossed, Richard with his hands in his pockets. They looked annoyed, like we were being difficult on purpose. "Get back in the car," Richard said. "So you can do this again?" I asked. "So you can humiliate and terrorize us some more?" "We're trying to teach you a lesson," Eleanor said. "You and that child need to learn that actions have consequences. She ruined the seat. She needs to understand that's not acceptable. She's 5 years old." I was screaming now, not caring who heard me. "She's a baby, and you pulled her out of a car on a highway. You could have gotten her killed." "Don't be so dramatic," Eleanor said. "We were making a point." "You were being cruel," I said. "You've been cruel to us for 7 years, and I've taken it because I thought I didn't have a choice. But I do have a choice, and I choose my daughter." I started walking back toward the car, carrying Chloe, intending to get our bags out of the trunk and figure out what to do next. But Richard blocked my path. "If you want your things, you get back in the car and you behave," he said. "Move," I said. "No." We stood there in a standoff, me holding my terrified daughter, him blocking my access to our belongings. Cars continued to fly past, and I was suddenly aware of how vulnerable we were, standing on the shoulder of a major highway with no protection. Eleanor came up beside Richard. "You're being ridiculous, Sarah. Get in the car. We'll go to San Diego. We'll have a nice weekend, and we'll forget this ever happened. Forget it happened, as if you could forget your own mother dragging your child out of a car and leaving her on the side of a highway. I'm not getting back in that car," I said. "Give me our bags and we'll find our own way home." "You don't have any money," Eleanor said. "You don't have a car. You don't have anything. How are you going to find your way home?" She was right, and the knowledge of it made me feel sick. My purse was in the car, with my wallet, my phone, everything. I had nothing but the clothes on my back and the child in my arms. "I'll figure it out," I said. Richard laughed, a cruel sound. "You'll figure it out. You can't even figure out how to support yourself, and you're going to figure out how to get home from the middle of nowhere?" "I don't care," I said. "I'd rather be stranded here than spend another minute with you." Something in my voice must have convinced them I was serious, because Eleanor's expression changed. The anger faded into something that might have been satisfaction. "Fine," she said. She went to the trunk, pulled out our 2 bags, and dropped them on the ground beside the road. Then she reached in and grabbed my purse, tossing it so it landed in the dirt near our bags. "There," she said. "Everything you own. Which isn't much, is it?" Richard was already getting back in the driver's seat. Eleanor paused before getting in the passenger side, looking at me with those cold blue eyes. "You think you're making some noble stand," she said, "but all you're doing is making your life harder. You're going to struggle and suffer and wish you'd stayed in the car. And when you come crawling back, begging for help, remember that this was your choice. This was your choice." I shot back. "You chose to treat us like garbage. You chose to throw your granddaughter out of a car. Those were your choices. I'm just choosing not to let you keep hurting us." Eleanor got in the car and slammed the door. Richard started the engine. I stood there, holding Chloe, watching as they pulled back onto the highway. The Mercedes merged into traffic, accelerated, and within 30 seconds was lost among all the other cars. They didn't look back. They didn't hesitate. They just left. I stood there on the shoulder of Interstate 5, holding my sobbing daughter, with nothing but 2 bags, a purse, and the realization that my parents had actually done it. They had actually abandoned us. The sun beat down mercilessly. The noise from the highway was constant and overwhelming. Chloe was still crying, her face buried in my neck, and I realized I was crying too. Not from sadness exactly, but from shock and anger and a strange sense of relief. They were gone. We were free. "Mama," Chloe whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "What are we going to do?" I set her down carefully, keeping one hand on her shoulder. I picked up my purse from the dirt and opened it. My wallet was there, with my ID, my credit cards, and about $60 in cash. My phone was there, at 15% battery but working. "We're going to be okay," I told her, and I was surprised to find I meant it. "Mama's going to take care of everything." A California Highway Patrol car pulled up behind us about 10 minutes later, lights flashing. The officer was young, probably in his late 20s, with concerned brown eyes and a kind face. "Everything okay here, ma'am?" he asked, taking in the scene. A woman and a small child, 2 shabby bags, standing on the highway shoulder in 90-degree heat. "We're fine," I said automatically. Then I realized that was stupid. We clearly weren't fine. Actually, no, we're not fine. We got separated from our family and we need to get to the nearest town. He looked at Chloe, who was clinging to my leg, her eyes red and swollen from crying. Separated how? I couldn't tell him the truth. If I told him my parents had abandoned us here, there would be police reports and investigations, and maybe they'd take Chloe from me while they sorted everything out. I couldn't risk that. "It was a misunderstanding," I said. "Family drama. We'll work it out. We just need a ride somewhere safe where I can figure out our next move." He looked skeptical, but he also looked sympathetic. "There's a town about 15 miles north. I can give you a ride there. There's a motel, some restaurants. You can make some calls, figure things out." "Thank you," I said, and I meant it with everything I had. "Thank you so much." He put our bags in the trunk of his patrol car and let us sit in the back. Chloe had never been in a police car before, and under different circumstances she might have been excited. But she just sat pressed against me, silent and exhausted. The officer, whose name tag said Ramirez, made small talk as he drove. He didn't push for information, didn't ask uncomfortable questions. He just talked about the weather and the traffic and how hot it had been this summer. I was grateful for his kindness. He dropped us off at a motel called the Desert Rose. It was exactly what you'd expect from a highway motel. Single story, parking lot out front, a flickering neon sign that said, "Vacancy." But it looked like paradise to me in that moment. Officer Ramirez carried our bags to the office door. "You sure you're going to be okay?" he asked. "We will be," I said. "Eventually." He handed me his card. "If you need anything, if there's trouble with your family, if you need help, you call me, okay?" I took the card, feeling emotion well up in my throat. This stranger was showing me more kindness than my own parents had in years. "Thank you," I managed to say. He tipped his hat to Chloe. "You take care of your mama, okay?" Chloe nodded solemnly. The motel room cost $45 for the night, leaving me with $15 in cash. I had my credit cards, but they were mostly maxed out. Still, I had enough to keep us alive for a few days while I figured out our next move. The room was depressing, brown carpet with stains I didn't want to think about. A smell that was part bleach, part mildew, part cigarette smoke. 2 double beds with thin floral bedspreads. A bathroom with chipped tiles and a toilet that ran constantly. But the door had a lock and a chain, and that was all that mattered. I got Chloe cleaned up, washing her face and hands, changing her out of her dusty pink dress into pajamas. She was moving like a robot, letting me maneuver her without any of her usual chatter. The light had gone out of her eyes. "Are we going back to Grandma and Grandpa's?" she asked as I tucked her into bed. "No, baby," I said. "We're never going back there." "Where are we going to live?" "I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out together." "Are they mad at me?" Her voice was so small. "Because I spilled the juice?" My heart broke all over again. "No, sweetheart, they're not mad at you. This isn't about you. This is about them being mean people." "But I was bad," she insisted. "I was loud and I spilled and I made Grandma's head hurt." I pulled her into my arms, holding her tight. "You weren't bad. You were being a normal, happy 5-year-old. And if Grandma couldn't handle that, that's her problem, not yours. Do you understand me? None of this is your fault." She started crying again, and I cried with her. We cried together until we were both exhausted, until there were no tears left. Then we lay down together in that sad motel bed, and I held my daughter while she finally fell asleep. But I stayed awake, staring at the water-stained ceiling, listening to Chloe's soft breathing and the traffic noise from the highway. And I made myself some promises. I promised that I would never let anyone make my daughter feel worthless again. I promised that I would build us a life, a real life, where we were safe and loved. I promised that I would never again mistake cruelty for love or obligation for family. And I promised that someday, somehow, Eleanor and Richard would understand exactly what they had thrown away. The next morning, I called the law firm where I worked. My boss, Patricia, was confused when I told her I was quitting. "Sarah, what's going on? Where are you?" "I can't explain right now," I said. "I just need you to know that I'm grateful for everything, but I have to go." "Are you in trouble? Do you need help?" The kindness in her voice almost broke me. "I'm okay. I just need to make some changes." "If you ever want to come back," she said, "you have a place here. You're good at what you do." I thanked her and hung up before I started crying again. Next, I called Jake. Jake Morrison had been my friend since college, one of the few people who hadn't disappeared when I got pregnant. He'd gone to law school while I'd been working dead-end jobs, and now he was an associate at a family law firm in Sacramento. When I told him what had happened, there was a long, terrible silence. "They did what?" His voice was tight, with barely controlled rage. "They left Chloe on the side of Interstate 5, I said, my voice shaking. "Jake, she's 5 years old and they dragged her out of the car and just left her there with cars and trucks flying past at 80 miles an hour. Sarah, that's child abandonment. That's child endangerment. That's potentially criminal charges. You need to file a police report right now." "I know," I said, "but I can't think about that yet. I need to figure out where we're going to go, what we're going to do. I need to get Chloe somewhere safe first." "Where are you now?" I told him about the motel, about Officer Ramirez, about having almost no money and maxed out credit cards. I felt ashamed admitting how little I had, but Jake didn't judge. "Okay," he said, and I could hear him thinking, processing. "Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to wire you $2,000. It's a loan, not a gift, so you don't have to feel weird about it. You're going to use that money to get somewhere stable. Find a town, find an apartment, find a job. Get Chloe enrolled in school, build something." "Jake, I can't ask you to." "You're not asking. I'm offering. Sarah, what they did to you is beyond wrong. It's evil. And I'm not going to let them win by letting you fail." I started crying again. "Thank you." "There's something else," Jake said. "I want you to document everything. Write down exactly what happened, with dates and times. Take photos of anything relevant. Save any text messages or voicemails they send, because when you're ready, when you're stable and safe, we're going to make them pay for what they did." "I don't want revenge," I said. "This isn't revenge," Jake replied. "This is justice. There's a difference." The money came through that afternoon, $2,000 in my bank account, more than I'd seen at one time in years. I held Chloe's hand as we walked to a nearby diner for lunch, and I let her order whatever she wanted. Pancakes with chocolate chips and whipped cream. She ate slowly, still quiet, but I saw a flicker of her normal spirit when she got syrup on her nose, and I wiped it off, making a silly face. I spent the next 2 days researching places we could go. Somewhere far enough from San Jose that I wouldn't risk running into my parents, somewhere cheap enough that I could actually afford it, somewhere with decent schools for Chloe. I finally settled on a small town called Oak Ridge, about 200 miles north. Oak Ridge had a population of about 8,000 people. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, which could be good or bad depending on perspective. But the cost of living was low. There was an elementary school with good reviews, and when I called about apartments, I found a 2-bedroom above a laundromat that was available immediately for $600 a month. We took a Greyhound bus to Oak Ridge. Chloe sat by the window, watching California roll past. She didn't sing or chatter like she normally would have. She just watched, her stuffed bunny clutched in her arms, and I wondered how long it would take for her to feel safe again. The apartment was worse than I'd imagined from the phone call. The building was old, probably built in the 70s, with peeling paint and cracked concrete steps. The laundromat on the first floor was loud, the machines clanking and humming at all hours. Our apartment was on the second floor, up a narrow staircase that creaked with every step. Inside, The floors were covered in ancient linoleum, cracked and yellowing. The kitchen was tiny, barely room for one person, with appliances that looked like they were from the 80s. The bathroom had pink tile and a rust stain in the tub that no amount of scrubbing would remove. The 2 bedrooms were small, closets barely big enough to be called closets, but the windows let in light. The locks on the door were solid, and it was ours. No one could kick us out for being too loud or making mistakes or simply existing. What do you think, baby? I asked Chloe, trying to sound upbeat. She looked around the empty apartment, at the bare walls and worn floors, and said, "It's quiet." And I realized that for her, that was what mattered. It was quiet. No one was yelling at her or criticizing her or making her feel like she was a burden. It was quiet, and it was safe. "Yeah," I said, kneeling down to her level. "It is quiet, and it's ours. We can do whatever we want here. We can paint the walls if we want. We can play music. We can sing as loud as we want." A tiny smile flickered across her face. "Really? Really?" We slept on the floor that first night, using our jackets as pillows and my hoodie as a blanket. It was uncomfortable and cold, but we were together and we were safe, and that was enough. The next morning, I started job hunting. I walked up and down Main Street, going into every business, asking if they were hiring. Most places said no, but a diner called Rosie's said they needed a waitress. The owner, a woman named Linda who was built like a linebacker with arms covered in faded tattoos, looked me up and down and asked, "You got experience?" "Some," I said. "I worked at a restaurant during college." "That was what, 10 years ago?" "About that." She studied me for a long moment. I was very aware of how I must look. Thin, exhausted, wearing my best shirt that was still wrinkled from being stuffed in a bag. But there must have been something in my face, some desperation or determination, because Linda nodded. "I'll give you a trial shift tomorrow. You do well, you've got the job. Pay is minimum wage plus tips. Tips here aren't great, but they're steady. You can work lunch or dinner, your choice." "I'll take both if you'll let me," I said. Linda's expression softened slightly. "You got a kid to take care of?" "A daughter. She's 5. School starts in 2 weeks. Lunch shift then, 10 to 3. Be here tomorrow at 9:30. I wanted to hug her but settled for a thank you that came out more emotional than I intended. That night, I used some of Jake's money to buy an air mattress from the Walmart on the edge of town. It wasn't much, but it was better than the floor. I also bought some cheap sheets, towels, dishes, and groceries, ramen noodles, peanut butter, bread, apples. The basics. Chloe helped me set up our new home. She put her stuffed animals on her bedroom windowsill, arranged her coloring books on the floor, hung her backpack on the doorknob. She was trying so hard to be brave, and it broke my heart. That night, after I'd tucked her into her new bed, an air mattress in an empty room, she asked, "Mama, are Grandma and Grandpa going to find us?" My blood ran cold. "Do you want them to?" "No," she said immediately, and the fear in her voice was answer enough. "I don't want to see them ever again." "Then you won't," I promised. "They don't know where we are. They can't find us. We're safe here." She nodded, but I could see she didn't quite believe me. And I understood. Trust, once broken, takes a long time to rebuild. I started at Rosie's the next day. The work was harder than I remembered. My feet ached after hours of standing, my back hurt from carrying heavy trays, and I got customers' orders wrong more times than I wanted to admit. But Linda was patient, showing me the system, correcting me without making me feel stupid. The regulars were curious about the new waitress. An older man named Frank, who came in every day for coffee and pie, asked where I was from. "Up north," I said vaguely, looking for a fresh start. "Aren't we all?" he said, and didn't push further. Over the next few weeks, I fell into a routine. Wake up at 6, get Chloe ready for the day. Drop her off at a neighbor's apartment, Mrs. Henderson, a retired teacher who watched Chloe for $20 a day, which was all I could afford. Work at Rosie's from 10 to 3. Pick up Chloe. Make dinner. Play with her. Read to her. Try to make our bare apartment feel like a home. Put her to bed. Collapse. The money from Jake was running out fast. First month's rent, last month's rent, deposit, furniture and household supplies, food, Mrs. Henderson. It was disappearing like water through my fingers, and I was terrified of what would happen when it ran out. Then Linda offered me more hours. "You're a good worker," she said. "Reliable, that matters. I need someone for dinner shift too, 5 to 10. You interested?" I should have said no. I should have worried about childcare, about exhaustion, about being away from Chloe so much, but I needed the money desperately. "I'm interested," I said. Mrs. Henderson agreed to watch Chloe during dinner shift too, for an extra $15. I started working 12-hour days, coming home at 10:30 at night to find Chloe already asleep in Mrs. Henderson's apartment, carrying her home and tucking her into bed. I was exhausted constantly. I lost weight I couldn't afford to lose. I had dark circles under my eyes and my hands shook from fatigue. But we were making it. Barely, but we were making it. Chloe started kindergarten at Oak Ridge Elementary. I walked her to school that first morning, her hand small in mine, and I felt like I was sending her into battle. What if the other kids were mean? What if the teacher didn't understand that she'd been through trauma? What if she had a breakdown and I wasn't there? Her teacher was a woman named Mrs. Garcia, probably in her 50s, with kind eyes and a gentle voice. She took one look at Chloe's anxious face and mine, and she seemed to understand without being told that this child needed extra gentleness. "We're going to have a wonderful year, Mrs. Garcia said to Chloe. "Would you like to help me feed the class fish?" Chloe nodded shyly, and I watched her follow Mrs. Garcia into the classroom. She looked back at me once, checking that I was still there, and I waved. Then she was gone, and I had to trust that she'd be okay. She wasn't okay at first. Mrs. Garcia called me after the first week, asking for a meeting. I came in during my break from Rosie's, terrified that Chloe had done something wrong, that we were going to get kicked out of this school too. But Mrs. Garcia's face was kind as she invited me to sit. "Chloe is a bright girl," she said. "Very creative, very sweet. But she's struggling with some behavioral issues." My heart sank. What kind of issues? "She's very anxious. She apologizes constantly, for everything. If she drops a crayon, she apologizes. If another child bumps into her, she apologizes. She flinches when I raise my voice, even if I'm not yelling at her. She has trouble making friends because she seems afraid to take up space." I felt tears pricking my eyes. "She's been through a lot recently, we both have." Mrs. Garcia reached across the desk and patted my hand. "I'm not criticizing, I'm trying to help. Has Chloe seen a therapist?" I thought about my bank account, which had maybe $300 in it. "We can't afford therapy. The school has a counselor who can see her once a week, at no cost. I'd like to refer her if that's okay with you." I wanted to cry from relief. "Yes, please, thank you." Chloe started seeing the school counselor, Mr. Peterson, every Tuesday afternoon. He was a young man with a beard and a gentle demeanor, and Chloe seemed to like him. She never told me what they talked about, and I didn't push. But gradually, slowly, I started to see changes. She stopped apologizing quite so much. She laughed more. She started making friends, Katie, who sat next to her in class, and Emma, who lived 2 streets over. She brought home artwork, proud crayon drawings of houses and families and rainbows. We were healing. Both of us. But I was still barely holding on financially. Even working 12 hours a day, the tips at Rosie's weren't enough. I was falling behind on utilities. Our diet consisted mostly of ramen and peanut butter sandwiches. Chloe needed new shoes because she'd outgrown her old ones, but I couldn't afford them, Linda noticed. One day after my shift, she called me into her tiny office in the back of the diner. "Sit down," she said. I sat, wondering if I was being fired. "You're a good worker," Linda said bluntly. "One of the best I've had. You show up on time, you don't complain, you work hard, but you look like you're about to collapse." "I'm fine," I said automatically. "Bullshit. You're working yourself to death and you're still broke, aren't you?" I didn't know what to say to that. Linda sighed. "Look, I know it's none of my business, but I've been where you are. Single mom, trying to make ends meet, running myself into the ground. So I'm going to make you an offer. I need a night manager, someone to close up, do the books, handle any problems. It's 4 nights a week, 10 p.m. to midnight, pays $15 an hour under the table." $15 an hour was more than double what I was making as a waitress. I can't work until midnight and then be back at 10 the next morning. You'd work Monday through Thursday nights, keep your regular lunch shifts on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. You'd have weekends free for your daughter. I did the math in my head. It would mean even less sleep, but it would mean real money. Enough to catch up on bills, buy Chloe what she needed, maybe even start saving again. "I'll do it," I said. Linda smiled. "Good. You start Monday." So I started working even more. Lunch shift at Rosie's, home to have dinner with Chloe and put her to bed. Back to Rosie's to close up and do the night manager work. home at 12:30, asleep by 1, up again at 6. I was running on 4 or 5 hours of sleep a night, fueled by coffee and desperation. But it was working. I caught up on the electric bill. I bought Chloe new shoes and a winter coat. I started putting $50 a week into my savings account, rebuilding the emergency fund that had been depleted. Mrs. Henderson was a godsend. She watched Chloe 4 nights a week, letting her fall asleep on her couch, never complaining. She also became something like a grandmother to Chloe, the kind Chloe should have had. She taught Chloe to knit, made her cookies, listened to her chatter about school and friends and her dreams. "You've got a good kid there, Mrs. Henderson told me once. She's going to be just fine." I wanted to believe her. Jake called me every few weeks, checking in. I updated him on our progress, and he always sounded proud. "You're doing it," he'd say. "You're actually doing it." "Did you doubt me?" I asked once, trying to make it a joke. "No," he said seriously. "But I know how hard it is to start over from nothing. The fact that you're not just surviving but building a life, that takes real strength." "I don't feel strong," I admitted. "I feel like I'm barely holding on." That's what strength looks like sometimes. During all this time, I heard nothing from my parents. Not a call, not a text, not a letter. It was like Chloe and I had simply ceased to exist for them. Part of me had expected them to reach out, to apologize, to at least check if we were alive. But there was only silence. I wondered sometimes what they thought had happened to us. Did they assume we'd crawled back to their house and found it locked? Did they think we'd ended up homeless? Did they care at all? The wondering ate at me sometimes, late at night when I couldn't sleep. But then I'd look at Chloe, sleeping peacefully in her room, not flinching or apologizing in her dreams, and I'd remember why we left. Some silences are blessings. 6 months after we arrived in Oak Ridge, Linda called me into her office again. "I'm promoting you," she said. "To what? I'm already the night manager." "To assistant manager. Salary position. 30,000 a year plus benefits, health insurance, paid vacation, the works. You'd work 40 hours a week, set your own schedule as long as the place runs smoothly." I stared at her. 30,000 a year was more money than I'd ever made. Benefits meant I could take Chloe to the doctor without panicking about the cost. Paid vacation meant maybe, someday, we could actually take a trip. "Linda, I don't know what to say." "Say yes, you've earned it. You basically run this place already, I'm just making it official." "Yes," I said, and then, "Thank you. Thank you so much." Linda waved off my gratitude. "Don't thank me. You did this yourself." With the promotion came better hours. I worked mornings and early afternoons, which meant I could pick Chloe up from school every day. We'd walk home together, her chattering about her day, showing me artwork and spelling tests. We'd have dinner together every night. I could read to her before bed, be there when she woke up from nightmares. For the first time since leaving my parents' house, I felt like I could breathe. Chloe was thriving. She'd made a best friend, Katie, and they were inseparable. She joined the school art club and was creating elaborate drawings that she insisted on hanging all over our apartment. She'd stopped flinching when people raised their voices. She'd stopped apologizing for existing. One night, about 8 months after we'd arrived in Oak Ridge, Chloe was taking a bath and I was cleaning up dinner dishes. She started singing, that same song from the movie, the one she'd been singing in the car when Eleanor had exploded. I froze, my hands in the dishwater, listening. Her voice was clear and happy, echoing slightly in the small bathroom. She was singing without fear, without worrying that someone would yell at her to stop. I had to sit down on the kitchen floor because my legs suddenly wouldn't hold me. I sat there with soap suds on my hands and tears running down my face, listening to my daughter sing, and I realized something profound. We had done it. We had actually done it. We had escaped and survived and built something real. We were okay, more than okay. We were happy. That's when my phone rang. An unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Hello?" "Sarah." It was Eleanor's voice, and hearing it after 8 months of silence made my blood run cold. "Sarah, I need to talk to you." My first instinct was to hang up, to block the number and pretend this call had never happened. But I found myself asking, "How did you get this number?" "That's not important. What's important is that your father is very ill. He's in the hospital. He had a heart attack." I felt nothing. No concern, no fear, just a vast emptiness. "I'm sorry to hear that." "He wants to see you. He wants to see both of you." "No." "Sarah, please. He's your father. He could die." He stopped being my father when he drove away and left his granddaughter on the side of a highway, I said. I'm sorry he's sick, but Chloe and I won't be visiting. You're really going to do this? Eleanor's voice was shaking. You're really going to punish us forever for one mistake? One mistake, I repeated. You call abandoning a 5-year-old child on the side of a busy highway one mistake? We were angry. We weren't thinking clearly. But we've had time to reflect, and we realize we overreacted. Overreacted. As if what they did was equivalent to raising their voices or giving us the silent treatment. I'm hanging up now, I said. Sarah, wait. There's something else you need to know. Richard lost his job. We're in serious financial trouble. The house is going into foreclosure. We have nothing. And there it was. The real reason for the call. Not concern for Chloe's well-being. Not genuine remorse. They needed something from me. That's unfortunate, I said. But it's not my problem. How can you be so cruel? Eleanor was crying now. We're your parents. We raised you. We took you in when you had nowhere else to go. You raised me to believe I was worthless without you, I said. You took me in and made sure I knew every day what a burden I was. You treated my daughter like she was disposable. And now you want my help? Now you want me to care about your problems? We're family, Eleanor said desperately. No, I said quietly. Family doesn't leave 5-year-olds on the highway. Family doesn't make children feel like mistakes. You taught me that blood doesn't make you family. Love makes you family. And you never loved us. You just tolerated us when it was convenient. I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking. Chloe was still singing in the bathtub, oblivious to the conversation that had just happened. I blocked Eleanor's number and sat there on the kitchen floor, trying to process what I was feeling. Not guilt, surprisingly. Not even satisfaction. Just a kind of sad acceptance that the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally never really had. Over the next few days, Eleanor tried calling from different numbers. I blocked them all. She sent emails that I deleted without reading. She even sent a letter to my workplace, which Linda intercepted and handed to me with a raised eyebrow. Someone causing you trouble? Linda asked. My mother, I said. Want me to tell her to fuck off if she shows up here? I laughed to spite myself. Yeah, actually, I'd appreciate that. The letter sat on my kitchen counter for 2 days before I worked up the courage to open it. Inside was a long, handwritten note from Eleanor. It talked about how sorry they were, how much they missed us, how they hadn't realized how much we meant to them until we were gone. It talked about Richard's heart attack, their financial troubles, their desperate situation, and then, at the end, the real ask. We know you're working now. We know you've made a life for yourself. We're so proud of you, and we're hoping that maybe you could help us, just a little, just until we get back on our feet. We're your parents, Sarah. You owe us something for all the years we supported you. I read that last line 3 times. You owe us. I called Jake. They contacted me, I told him. Eleanor's been calling, sending letters. They want money. Of course they do, Jake said grimly. Are you going to give it to them? No. Good. Sarah, I've been doing research. What they did to you and Chloe, the abandonment on the highway, it's legally actionable. Child endangerment, emotional distress, potentially even assault, given that Eleanor physically pulled Chloe from the car. If you wanted to, we could file a civil lawsuit. You could sue them for damages. The idea had been in the back of my mind for months, but hearing Jake say it out loud made it real. What kind of damages? Medical expenses for Chloe's therapy, pain and suffering for both of you, punitive damages for their behavior. Conservatively, we'd be looking at a few $100,000. If we get the right jury, could be more. A few $100,000. That kind of money would change our lives. Chloe could go to college, we could buy a house, I could stop working myself to exhaustion. But it would also mean dragging everything into the open, reliving that day in court, putting Chloe through depositions and testimony, seeing my parents again. I need to think about it, I said. Take your time, Jake replied. But Sarah, don't think about what they deserve. Think about what you and Chloe deserve. Think about justice. I thought about it for weeks. I talked to Mrs. Henderson, who said, You do what's right for that little girl, not what's right for your parents. I talked to Linda, who said, Sometimes you have to salt the earth so nothing grows there anymore. I even talked to Mrs. Garcia, Chloe's teacher, who said, Chloe is doing so well now. Whatever you decide, make sure it doesn't set her back. But I couldn't talk to Chloe about it. She was 6 years old. How do you ask a 6-year-old if she wants to sue her grandparents? The decision was made for me when Eleanor showed up at Rosie's. I was working lunch shift on a Tuesday, taking orders from the regular crowd, when the door opened and she walked in. I didn't recognize her at first. The woman who walked in looked 10 years older than the Eleanor I remembered. Her hair was gray at the roots, pulled back in a messy ponytail. She wore jeans and a plain blouse from Target or Walmart, clothes I never would have imagined her in. She'd lost weight, and not in a healthy way. She looked gaunt, exhausted. But her eyes were the same, hard and demanding. She sat in my section, in a booth by the window. I thought about asking Linda to cover my tables so I wouldn't have to serve her, but I decided I was done running from these people. I walked over with my order pad. "Coffee?" I asked, my voice professionally polite. "Sarah." Eleanor reached for my hand. I pulled it back. "Please, I just want to talk. I'm working." 5 minutes, please." I glanced at Linda, who was watching from behind the counter. She gave me a nod that said it was my call. 5 minutes, I said, sliding into the booth across from Eleanor. "Then you leave and you don't come back." "You look well," Eleanor said, and there was surprise in her voice. "I am well. We both are." "I'm glad. Sarah, I came to apologize. What we did that day, leaving you on the highway, it was unforgivable. I've replayed it in my mind 1,000 times, and I still can't believe we did that. I can't believe I did that." She looked sincere. Her eyes were shiny with unshed tears, but I'd learned not to trust tears. "Okay," I said. "You've apologized. Is that all?" "I want to explain. I want you to understand why." "I don't care why," I interrupted. "There is no why that makes what you did okay. You left a child on the side of a busy highway. You traumatized her. You traumatized me. There's no explanation that justifies that." Eleanor's face crumpled. "We were horrible parents. I know that now. Richard and I, we were so focused on appearances, on what people thought, that we forgot what actually mattered. We forgot that you were our daughter, that Chloe was our granddaughter." "You didn't forget," I said. "You just didn't care. There's a difference." "I care now," Eleanor said desperately. "Sarah, Richard had a heart attack. He's not the same. He's weak, he can barely work, and we lost everything. The house, the cars, our savings, we have nothing. We're living in a 1-bedroom apartment and we can barely afford that. I'm working at a grocery store, bagging groceries. Do you know how humiliating that is?" There it was. Not remorse, not genuine regret. Just self-pity and a plea for help. "You want money?" I said flatly. "I want my daughter," Eleanor said, but her eyes betrayed her. "But yes, if you could help us financially, just until we get back on our feet." "No." "Sarah, please. We're desperate. We have medical bills from Richard's heart attack, and our insurance doesn't cover everything. We're drowning. You're working now, you're making money. You could help us." I laughed, a bitter sound that made the couple in the next booth look over. "I could help you. Let me tell you about my life, Eleanor. I work 60 hours a week. I make $30,000 a year, which, in case you don't know, is barely above poverty level. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment above a laundromat that costs me $600 a month, which is cheap but still takes 20% of my income. I can't afford health insurance, so if Chloe or I get sick, I'm screwed. I shop at thrift stores for our clothes. Last month, Chloe needed glasses, and I had to put them on a payment plan. My idea of a vacation is taking Chloe to the park down the street." I leaned forward, my voice low and intense. "I built all of this from nothing, from standing on the side of a highway with $15 cash and 2 bags of clothes. I did it alone, without any help from you, without any family support. So don't you dare sit there and tell me I owe you anything." Eleanor was crying now, real tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. For all of it. For making you feel worthless, for treating Chloe like a burden, for that terrible day on the highway. I'm sorry, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it up to you if you'll let me." "I don't want you to make it up to me," I said. "I want you to leave me alone. I want you to leave Chloe alone. We've built a good life here, a happy life, and you're not part of it. She's my granddaughter." "She was your granddaughter. You gave up that right when you dragged her out of a car and left her on the highway. She still has nightmares about that day, did you know that? She wakes up screaming, afraid I'm going to leave her somewhere. She's 6 years old, and she's terrified of abandonment because of what you did to her." Eleanor put her head in her hands. "I'll never forgive myself." "Good," I said coldly. You shouldn't, but your self-flagellation doesn't earn you access to our lives. It doesn't erase what you did. And it definitely doesn't mean I'm going to give you money. I stood up from the booth. I need to get back to work. I'll comp your coffee. But I want you to leave now, and I don't want to see you again. Eleanor looked up at me, mascara running down her face. What if Richard dies? What if you never get a chance to say goodbye? Then I'll live with that, I said, just like I've lived with everything else you put me through. I walked away, my heart pounding, my hands shaking. Linda appeared at my elbow immediately. You okay? Yeah, I said, and I realized I meant it. I'm okay. Eleanor left without drinking the coffee. I watched through the window as she got into an old Honda Civic, rusted and dented, and drove away. And I felt nothing. Not satisfaction. Not guilt. Just nothing. That night, I called Jake. I want to file the lawsuit. You're sure? I'm sure. You were right. This isn't about revenge. It's about justice. They hurt us. They traumatized Chloe, and they need to face consequences for that. Plus, if I don't do something legal, they're going to keep showing up, keep asking for help. I need to make it clear that they can't use us anymore. Okay, Jake said. I'll draw up the papers. This is going to get ugly, Sarah. Are you ready for that? I've been ready, I said. Let's do it. The lawsuit was filed 3 weeks later. Jake sent the papers to my parents via certified mail. The suit outlined everything. The emotional abuse during the 7 years we lived with them, the physical act of removing Chloe from the vehicle, the abandonment on the highway, the lasting psychological trauma. We were suing for medical expenses related to Chloe's therapy, pain and suffering for both of us, and punitive damages. The amount we were asking for was $500,000. I knew my parents didn't have that kind of money. The point wasn't to get rich. The point was to put a legal stake through the heart of any future claims they might make on us. To make it absolutely clear that they had wronged us, not the other way around. Eleanor called from a number I hadn't blocked yet, screaming about betrayal and cruelty. How can you do this to us? We're your parents. We're already suffering and now you want to destroy us completely? You destroyed yourselves. I said calmly. This lawsuit is just documentation of what you did. If you didn't want to face legal consequences, you shouldn't have committed illegal acts. It wasn't illegal. We were her grandparents. We had a right. You had no right to endanger a child, I said. Talk to a lawyer. Oh wait, you can't afford one, can you? Well, the court will appoint you one. See you in court, Eleanor. I hung up and blocked that number too. The legal process took months. My parents tried everything to get the case dismissed. They claimed we were lying, that they'd simply pulled over to let us out at our request. They claimed Chloe had been violent and they'd needed to separate us for safety reasons. They claimed I was making up the abuse for financial gain. But Jake was thorough. He had Officer Ramirez's incident report from the day we were picked up. He had statements from Mrs. Garcia about Chloe's behavioral issues when she started school. He had medical records from Chloe's therapy sessions. He had my employment records showing the sudden job change and relocation. He even tracked down other travelers who had been on Interstate 5 that day, one of whom vaguely remembered seeing a small child on the shoulder and an expensive car pulling away. The evidence was overwhelming. My parents' lawyer, a tired-looking public defender, tried to negotiate a settlement. Your parents don't have $500,000, he told Jake. They don't have $100,000. They're judgment-proof. Even if you win, you won't collect anything. We don't want their money, Jake told him. We want a judgment on the record, stating clearly and legally that they committed child endangerment. We want documentation that they abused and abandoned their granddaughter. We want this to follow them for the rest of their lives. The lawyer looked at me with something like pity. You really hate them, don't you? No, I said. I don't hate them. I just want to make sure they can never hurt us again. And I want Chloe to have something legal she can point to when she's older, something that says what they did was wrong. Not just wrong morally, but wrong legally. I want her to know that what happened to her wasn't acceptable, wasn't her fault, and wasn't something she should ever tolerate from anyone. The case went to court on a cold day in February, almost 2 years after we'd left my parents' house. I had to take Chloe with me because Mrs. Henderson was sick and I couldn't find another babysitter on short notice. I left her in a waiting room with Linda, who had volunteered to take the day off to watch her. You go fight, Linda told me. We'll be fine out here. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, less dramatic than on TV. My parents sat at the defendant's table, and I barely recognized them. Richard looked like he'd aged 20 years. He moved slowly, carefully, like every step hurt. Eleanor sat beside him, her hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead. They didn't look at me when I came in, not once. The trial lasted 2 days. Jake put me on the stand first, and I told our story. I described the 7 years of emotional abuse, the constant criticism, the way they made Chloe feel like a burden. I described that day on the highway in detail: the fight, the juice spill, Eleanor dragging Chloe from the car, them driving away. The defense attorney tried to make me seem vindictive, someone with an axe to grind. Isn't it true that your parents supported you financially for 7 years, gave you a place to live rent-free? They gave me a place to live, I agreed, and they made sure I paid for it every single day with my dignity. Isn't it true that you chose to leave their car, that they offered to take you back? That's not true. They left us on the side of the highway. A police officer found us and took us to safety. Officer Ramirez testified next, describing how he'd found us. The child was clearly traumatized, he said. She was clinging to her mother and wouldn't speak. The mother was trying to hold it together but was obviously in shock. This wasn't a situation where someone had simply decided to get out of a car. This was a dangerous situation for a vulnerable child. Mrs. Garcia testified about Chloe's condition when she started school. She exhibited classic signs of trauma and abuse: excessive apologizing, anxiety, fear of making mistakes. It took months of counseling before she started to show normal childhood behavior. The therapist who had worked with Chloe testified about her sessions, about the nightmares and the abandonment anxiety. Jake played his trump card on the second day. He'd found surveillance footage from a gas station near where we'd been left. The footage showed my parents' Mercedes pulling in about 20 minutes after they'd left us. You could see Eleanor and Richard getting out, Eleanor checking her makeup in the side mirror, both of them looking completely unconcerned. They went inside, bought coffee, and left. No signs of distress, no attempts to call for help or report their missing daughter and granddaughter. These are not the actions of people who accidentally got separated from family members, Jake told the jury. These are the actions of people who deliberately abandoned a woman and child and felt no remorse about it. The defense put my parents on the stand. Richard testified that they'd been trying to teach me a lesson about responsibility. Sarah had been coddling the child, he said, making her soft. We thought if we showed her what it would be like to be on her own, she'd appreciate what we'd done for her. So you left a 5-year-old child on the side of a busy highway to teach her mother a lesson? Jake asked. We knew Sarah would take care of her. We knew they'd be fine. How did you know that? What if Officer Ramirez hadn't come along? What if no one had helped them? It was 90 degrees that day. They had no water, no food, no transportation. Your granddaughter could have died. Richard had no answer to that. Eleanor's testimony was worse. She cried on the stand, saying she regretted it every day, that she'd been a terrible mother and grandmother, that she'd let her pride and anger control her. She begged me to forgive her, turning to look at me directly for the first time. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I know I can never make this right. But please, please don't destroy us over one terrible mistake. I looked at her, and I felt nothing. No anger, no pity, nothing. She was a stranger to me. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they came back, the 4 women read the verdict. In the case of Sarah Miller versus Eleanor and Richard Miller, we find in favor of the plaintiff on all counts. The defendants are ordered to pay $500,000 in damages. The courtroom erupted. My parents' lawyer was shaking his head. Eleanor was crying. Richard sat perfectly still, like he'd been turned to stone. The judge added his own comments. I want to be very clear, he said, looking directly at my parents. What you did was not just morally wrong but legally wrong. You endangered a child. You caused significant psychological harm. You then compounded that harm by refusing to acknowledge your actions and by attempting to manipulate your daughter into providing you with financial support. This judgment will stand as a permanent record of your actions. I hope you spend the rest of your lives trying to understand the magnitude of what you did. After the verdict, Jake pulled me aside. They don't have the money, he reminded me. They'll probably file for bankruptcy. You won't see a dime of that judgment. I know, I said. That's not why we did this. Then why? I thought about Chloe, waiting in the lobby with Linda. Because someday, when Chloe asks me why we don't see her grandparents, I can show her this judgment. I can show her legal documentation that says what they did was wrong. I can show her that I fought for her, that I stood up for her, that I made sure the people who hurt her faced consequences. That matters more than money. Jake smiled. You're a good mom, Sarah. I'm trying to be. I walked out of the courtroom, and Linda was waiting with Chloe. My daughter ran to me, and I picked her up, holding her tight. Is it over? She asked. Yeah, baby, it's over. Are we going home now? Yeah, we're going home. And we did. We went home to our little apartment above the laundromat, and we had dinner, and we watched a movie, and everything was normal and peaceful and safe. The judgment had consequences beyond what I expected. My parents had to declare bankruptcy. They lost what little they had left. I heard through mutual acquaintances that they'd moved to a cheaper state, somewhere in the Midwest, living on Richard's disability and Eleanor's part-time job at a dollar store. I felt no satisfaction in their downfall. But I also felt no guilt. They'd made their choices. They were living with the consequences. Life went on. Chloe continued to grow and thrive. She was 7, then 8, then 9. She joined the school choir and discovered she loved singing, really loved it, in a way that she'd been too afraid to express when we lived with my parents. She performed in school concerts, her voice clear and strong, and I sat in the audience crying happy tears. Linda promoted me again, this time to full manager. I was making $45,000 a year, which still wasn't much but felt like a fortune compared to where we'd started. We moved to a better apartment, one with 2 real bedrooms and a kitchen that didn't smell like mildew. We got a car, nothing fancy, just a used Honda that ran reliably. We took our first real vacation, a weekend at the coast where Chloe played in the waves and built sandcastles. Mrs. Henderson became the grandmother Chloe deserved. She came to every school concert, every art show, every birthday party. She taught Chloe to bake and to garden and to stand up for herself. When Mrs. Henderson died suddenly of a heart attack when Chloe was 10, we both grieved like we'd lost family. Because she was family, not by blood, but by choice. Chloe asked about her biological grandparents sometimes. I'd answer her questions honestly, age-appropriately. I never badmouthed them, but I never lied about what they'd done either. Why were they so mean to us? She asked once when she was 9. Some people are so focused on what they think they need that they forget to see what they already have. I told her. They wanted the perfect family, the perfect life. And when we didn't fit that image, they couldn't see our value. That's sad for them, Chloe said. Yeah, it is. I'm glad we left. Me too, baby. When Chloe was 10, almost 3 years after the court case, I got a letter from Eleanor. It had been forwarded through Jake's office somehow. She'd tracked down my lawyer and sent it there, knowing I'd blocked every other method of contact. Jake called me before forwarding it. It's from your mother. Do you want me to read it first or just shred it? Send it, I said. I can handle it. The letter arrived 2 days later. I waited until Chloe was at a sleepover at Katie's house before I opened it, not wanting her to see me upset if the letter was manipulative or cruel, but it wasn't. Not exactly. Dear Sarah, it began. I don't expect you to read this. I don't expect you to respond. I just need to write it, need to put these words somewhere besides my own head. I'm sorry. I've said that before, and you didn't believe me, and I understand why. But I need you to know that I mean it. Truly, deeply, completely. I'm sorry for the way we treated you during those 7 years you lived with us. I'm sorry for making you feel small and worthless. I'm sorry for treating Chloe like she was a burden instead of a blessing. And I'm especially sorry for that day on the highway. That was the worst thing I've ever done, and I'll carry the guilt of it for the rest of my life. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that losing you and Chloe was the biggest mistake of my life. Not because of the lawsuit or the money or any of that, but because I lost my daughter and my granddaughter, and I'll never get that back. I lost the chance to know Chloe, to watch her grow up, to be part of her life. I lost the chance to have a real relationship with you, one built on love instead of obligation and criticism. I destroyed all of that with my own hands, and I have to live with that. Richard died last month. Heart failure. Before he died, he told me to find you, to tell you he was sorry. He wanted to see Chloe one more time. I told him that wasn't my decision to make. He died knowing that his granddaughter would never forgive him, and that broke his heart more than any medical condition. I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty. You have nothing to feel guilty about. I'm telling you because you deserve to know. I'm 62 years old now, working at a Walmart in Nebraska, living in a trailer park. This is what my pride and my cruelty bought me. A life alone, estranged from the only family that mattered, haunted by the memories of the people I drove away. I hope you and Chloe are happy. I hope you've built a good life. I hope Chloe has grown into the wonderful person I could see in her even when I was too stubborn to admit it. I hope you've found people who love you the way we should have loved you. You deserved so much better than what we gave you. I know that now, far too late to make any difference. I won't contact you again. This is my goodbye. Live well, Sarah. Love Chloe with everything you have. And forget about us. We don't deserve to take up space in your thoughts. With regret and love I should have shown sooner. Your mother. I read the letter 3 times. I cried a little, not from sadness exactly, but from a complicated mix of emotions I couldn't quite name. Grief for what could have been. Relief that it was truly over. Pity for the woman Eleanor had become. But I didn't respond. I didn't reach out. I took the letter and I put it in a box in the back of my closet, along with the court documents and the few photos I had from my childhood. Maybe someday, when Chloe was older, I'd give it to her and let her decide what, if anything, she wanted to do with it. For now, I was content to let sleeping dogs lie. 3 months after that letter, I met someone. His name was Daniel, and he was a teacher at Chloe's school, though not her teacher. We met at a parent-teacher conference and ended up talking for 2 hours about books and teaching methods and the challenges of raising kids in the modern world. He asked me to coffee. I said yes. Dating as a single mom in her mid-30s was terrifying. I'd been alone for so long, focused entirely on Chloe and survival, that I'd forgotten how to think of myself as someone who could be romantically interesting. But Daniel was patient and kind, and he understood that Chloe came first. Always. Chloe liked him too, which was the important thing. He never tried to replace her absent father or her terrible grandparents. He was just Daniel, someone who cared about both of us, who showed up consistently, who made us both laugh. A year later, when Chloe was 11, Daniel and I got married in a small ceremony at the park near our apartment. Chloe was my maid of honor, wearing a dress she'd picked out herself, her hair full of flowers. Mrs. Henderson would have loved it. Linda catered the reception, refusing to let us pay for anything. "Your family," she said when I tried to insist. "This is what family does." Jake came too, bringing his wife and kids. Chloe's friends from school were there, Daniel's parents and sister, our little chosen family, the people who had loved us and supported us and helped us build something real. Standing there in the sunshine, Chloe dancing with Katie while Daniel held my hand, I realized something. I had won. Not the court case, though that mattered. Not the battle against my parents, though that had been necessary. I had won the war for a good life, a life defined by love and choice, not obligation and fear. My parents had tried to make me believe I was nothing without them. They'd tried to make me think I'd fail, that I'd come crawling back, that I needed their approval and support to survive. They were wrong about everything. I didn't just survive, I thrived. And every day that I woke up in my home, with my daughter and my husband, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about us, I proved them wrong all over again. That's my revenge. Not hurting them, not destroying them, but simply living well, living freely, living with joy and purpose and love. Because at the end of the day, the best revenge isn't making someone else miserable. It's refusing to let them make you miserable. So let me ask you something. Have you ever had to cut off someone toxic? Have you ever had to choose yourself over someone who was supposed to love you? How did you find the courage? What helped you through it? I want to hear your stories because maybe your story will help someone else who's standing at that crossroads right now, trying to decide if they're strong enough to walk away. Leave your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, if you've ever felt like you weren't enough, if you've ever been made to feel like a burden, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel because I share real stories about real people finding their power and rebuilding their lives. Your support helps these stories reach people who need to hear them. And remember, you're not alone. You're stronger than you think, and you deserve a life filled with people who love you for exactly who you are, not who they want you to be.